Good morning and welcome to another online Sunday school class with Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. As always, we like to begin by reminding you that we here at Tunnel Hill Baptist Church believe that Jesus is the Christ, that He's the Son of the living God who lived a perfect life and died a sacrificial death for your sins and for mine, and that if you will place your hope and trust in Jesus Christ as both Lord and Savior, that you will be saved. If you'd like more information about what it means to make Jesus Christ your personal Lord and Savior, we would invite you to follow the link in the description that will take you to a full gospel presentation. It'll also show you how to respond to the gospel and connect with Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. If you live in the Hardin County, Kentucky area, we would invite you to join us for worship right here at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. We are both in person and you can watch online through Facebook Live. If you'd like more information about our church, you can always connect with us. And if you do not live in the area, we would still like to connect with you and help you find a Bible-believing church where you do live. We are in the last session of our study of Jeremiah, and we're actually going over to Lamentations today. This is session 13, and we're going to be looking at Lamentations chapter 3, verses 19 through 33. And the title of our session today is Good. So again, this is session 13, titled Good, and we're going to be looking at Lamentations chapter 3, verses 19 through 33. I want you to think for just a second about what comes to mind when you think of the most peaceful place. When you think peace, peace, tranquility, when you think about peace, what comes to mind? Is there a particular place, or is there kind of an image? Maybe it's not necessarily a particular place, but just kind of a general scene that comes to mind, and what is it about that really inspires peace and kind of reminds you of that, a desire for that peace or that tranquility? Here's what we want you to do: is we ask questions throughout our study. We want you to pause the video. We want you to interact with our questions, and you can either do that by writing something down on pen and paper, or if you're watching this with your spouse or family or a friend, that you actually take the time to discuss that. And then in both cases, just hit play when you're ready to start again. Hit pause, then hit play again, and we'll just keep going with our study. So again, the question that we're asking is, when you think of a peaceful place, when you think of peace and tranquility, what kind of image comes to mind? And with that, what makes that so peaceful? And maybe why is peace important, and why that comes to your mind when you think about it? Take a couple minutes, think about that, and then we'll keep going in our study. All right, hopefully you have a lot of things. I know some people, they're going to think of their home. Some people are going to think of a certain maybe vacation spot, whether it's a beach or a mountain or whatever. I know for me, when I think about peace and tranquility, like I'm thinking, log cabin in the woods by a lake type of scenario, like being away from the hustle and bustle of my normal job and all that type of stuff. Excuse me, and being a place where I can rest, relax, maybe go fishing, all those type of things. And so I kind of think about it. It's kind of a fictional thing. It's probably based a little bit off of when I used to go on vacation as a teenager to Minnesota, and being able to kind of have a cabin right next to a big lake and all that type of stuff. That's what I think of when I think of peace. And there's a joy to that. There's a desire to that because, in those type of moments, you get that release and that rest that maybe eludes you when you're kind of going through the hustle and bustle of life. Our passage today is going to deal with peace a great deal, but it's going to be a different kind of peace. It's going to be a peace that God provides. And when we think about that, when God talks about peace, it is often very different than when the world talks about peace. When the world talks about peace, it may be talking about a vacation destination. It may be talking about a break from all of the hard things. We might look at peace as the absence of conflict between two nations, that we kind of sign peace treaties to end fighting and all that stuff. But when God talks about peace, often He's talking about peace between Him and us, and that we are set back into a right relationship with Him, not temporary in the sense of He's just giving us a break, but something where He is extending peace and He is extending hope in the midst of something that's intended to be a lasting hope. In today's session we're going to be studying the book of Lamentations. The book of Lament was written shortly after the fall and destruction of Jerusalem. We will discover how Jeremiah looked for and found God's peace during a terrible, time of destruction. As we already mentioned, the book of Lamentations was written by Jeremiah probably just after the destruction of Jerusalem. He saw Jerusalem destroyed, completely taken out, and then he responded to that destruction and devastation by writing these poems or these songs. In fact, the book points out that the book of Lamentations is actually 3 funeral songs. We have we have multiple chapters in there, 5 funeral songs. We're going to be looking at the third of those, all of these expressing grief over the destruction of the city as well as the temple. We're looking at the third funeral song, and while Jeremiah is grieving, to be sure, in this psalm, there's also a portion where he addresses the hope because of God's unchanging love for his people. Let's dive into that. We're going to look at Lamentations. We're going to be in chapter 3. We're going to start in verse 19 and read through to verse 24. And as we do so, I want you to listen for Jeremiah's despair alongside his hope for God. So picking up in verse 19, we see this. He says, "Remember my affliction and my homelessness, the wormwood and the poison. I continually remember them and have become depressed. Yet I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's faithful love, we do not perish, for his mercies never end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will put my hope in him." So as we think about this passage, we begin to, right off the bat, begin to see the reason for Jeremiah's despair and why he is despairing. He talks about his affliction. Undoubtedly, the mistreatment by Babylon is related to that, as well as his homelessness, thinking about the city where he lived, the temple where he worshiped. All of that is gone and destroyed. The wormwood and the poison would be a reference to the bitter herbs and poisonous things that were common in that area, and things that were most unpleasant. And when he thinks about these things, in fact, he dwells on them quite a bit. It leads him to kind of a place of depression or sorrow and just feeling low in every way, shape, and form. And so we see very clearly, and if you want to read the previous part, he's explained a lot of that Jeremiah is very much so in a season of loss and pain and suffering, that he is experiencing the bitterness of life and really the bitterness that comes with God's judgment over Jerusalem and over the people of Judah because of their waywardness. The book says this, it says, Jeremiah called on God to remember his despair. When God remembers in the Bible, it's a way to describe that he is about to do something. Jeremiah's call for help was not only a prayer for himself, but also for all the people. God often uses prayers of his people to change their hearts and to give them a hope when they are tempted to lose hope. And so in this passage, when we look at this, he says, therefore I call to mind and I have hope. Because of the Lord's faithful love, we do not perish, for his mercies are never ending. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. I say, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will put my hope in him. Now really it's the beginning in verse 19. It says, remember my affliction and my homelessness, the wormwood and the poison. What we see in this passage is he's calling God to act. He's praying that God would move, that he would see what's happening, that he would look upon them, and really, if anything, that he would remember his covenant with Israel and begin the process of restoring them and moving on their behalf. The book asks this question. It says, how can we avoid wallowing in self-pity and sorrow and pain? You know, what we see happening here is he's praying to God that he will step in, and because of that, he has hope and he looks to the future because of what he remembers about God. How can we avoid wallowing in self-pity and sorrow and pain? Take a couple minutes, pause the video, and discuss that, and then we'll keep going in our study. All right, as we look at the passage, what we see here is Jeremiah moves from thinking about what's going on and the sorrow that he's experienced and all that, and then he calls to mind and has hope because he remembers who God is. He remembers the promises that God has made, and he remembers the good things that God has done, and that's really what pulls him out of that wallowing and pulls him out of that self-pity. And that's something we can do as well. When we're going through hard times, when we're dealing with pain and suffering, when we're in the midst of sorrow and pain, we can look to who God is and remember who he is. In fact, that's what we see in our passage. He says, because of your faithful love, because we're not dead, we're not gone, that reminds us that you have not abandoned us, that your faithful love is still there, that your mercies are new every morning, and that you're because of your faithfulness. And so he's trusting in the Lord, and he's finding hope in the Lord because of the fact of who God is, because of his character. This leads the book to another question, which was, how does focusing on God's love and mercy help a person endure God's discipline? And that's a great question for us to consider and it's something to really think about when we are going through sorrow, when we are going through pain, when we're going through, sometimes it very much so is that our discipline is the result and the consequences of our sin. What we should do is look to God and look to his character and look to his nature and be reminded that God is quick to forgive, that his discipline is a reminder that he loves us and that he is never going to completely just write us off and give up on us. But even in our disciplining, he is moving us back into a right and even a stronger relationship with him. And all of that gives us hope that God is even using our suffering and using this kind of time of discipline as a means to grow us and to draw us into a closer walk with him. The book says this, it says, Jeremiah shows us how to focus on God's love and mercy even when we are walking through times of despair. Let's look at verses 25 through 30, and this is going to help us with that. In fact, I want you to listen for Jeremiah's patient attitude in waiting for God. So picking up in verse 25, we read this. It says, the Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the person who seeks him. It is good to wait quietly for salvation from the Lord. It is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is young. Let him sit alone and be silent, for God has disciplined him. Let him put his mouth in the dust. Perhaps there is still hope. Let him offer his cheek to the one who would strike him. Let him be filled with disgrace. Now, I have to be honest, when we kind of look at this passage, this is so contrary to what we see in the world and the kind of ideas of discipline that we see in our culture today when we are so concerned about self-image and all of those things. But if we're really honest with ourselves today and as much back then, so often we're worried about hurting somebody's self-esteem, but often ego and being self-centered is really the problem in so much of us. And so to be humbled is really a good thing. In fact, look what it says. It is good to wait quietly for salvation for the Lord, to bear the yoke while he's still young, to be alone and silent, to be disciplined, to put your mouth to the dust, to offer your cheek. All of these are examples of humility, of being humbled and recognizing that we are rightly receiving the punishment for our sin, for rebelling against God, and learning from it so that we might respond in the right way. In fact, that idea there, it is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is still young. That is an idea of discipline that is coming there. Is this yoke that it's used several times by Jeremiah. We even see it in Jesus when he talks about put my yoke upon you, for my burden is easy. All of those things, all of those are a matter of being disciplined, being trained. And he's saying that it is good for people to be trained. It is good for us to go through disciplining and even what they're going through in this moment, because that helps us grow. Think about this for a second. This is a question the book asks. This is, what does waiting for the Lord look like, and why is it so hard? Why is it so important for believers to wait on God and learn as they do so? So take a couple minutes to discuss that, and then we'll keep going in our study. We'll discuss it as well. All right, so what does waiting on the Lord look like? And often that is we find ourselves, and I love there was a song that came out many years ago that was talking about being in the waiting room. And there's an idea here that we're going through something, often something that is unpleasant, and we're waiting for it to end and us to kind of start on that next chapter of our life. And sometimes it's waiting for a job, sometimes it's waiting for a relationship to move forward. Sometimes it's waiting for maybe a health issue to get past, waiting for a surgery. Sometimes it's just enduring things that are kind of unpleasant through rough patches of life that we know are not going to last forever, but we're waiting on God to take those things and turn them into something good. And sometimes it's hard to know, or even hard to believe, that there is an end to those things, but waiting on the Lord and doing what it's saying here is really there to help us deepen our strength and our trust in God and what He is doing. The question goes on to say, why is it important for believers to wait on God and learn as they do so? And it's because, that's how we grow. We can see, God, we can all admit that the things that are just handed to us, we often don't value like we should. And when we are waiting on the Lord and trusting in Him, we're humbled because of the fact that we have to trust in His timing. We have to learn during those seasons, and our faith is grown, our faith is strengthened. All of those things happen, and really that's how we grow. That's how we learn. So often things are not learned if they're given easy, but when they're brought about through struggle and trial, they seem to stick and be more powerful. The book goes on to say this. This is a statement in our workbook. It says this: not only should one seek the Lord while waiting for Him, but it is good to wait quietly on His salvation. Rather than complaining to God about the situation or His timing, it is good to have a posture of quiet resolve, knowing that God is perfect in His timing and in all His ways. Based on Jeremiah 25 through 30, what did Jeremiah learn while he waited on God? Well, let's look back at the text to answer that question. And as we kind of get through this, he says, it is good to wait quietly for salvation, for a man to bear his yoke. Let him sit alone and be silent, for God is disciplined. Let him put his mouth to the dust. Perhaps there is still hope. Let him offer his cheek to the one who would strike him. Let him be filled with disgrace. I think when we look at what Jeremiah learned, I think, again, that word is humility. That he is learning from this experience that we have to completely rely on God, that we have to trust on Him, and that if we approach the Lord with arrogance and kind of this haughty mind that we're going to tell Him what to do, or we're going to make our own way. We hear that in our culture a lot. That we're going to make our own way, that we're going to experience that. And so if he's learned that humility is good, that discipline is good, and that we should receive that discipline knowing that God is going to do something good with that. That leads to this question, which is, what does the way a person responds to hardship say about him or her relationship with God? Take a couple minutes to discuss that, and then we'll start to wrap up our study. You've probably heard the old statement that the proof is in the pudding, and I think that hardship and trials in life are really very true about that when we talk about an individual's walk with the Lord. And that when we go through, as the book called it, hardships, that tells us whether we really trust God or not. Oftentimes, I think we approach God not so much that we trust Him no matter what, but just that we're going to let Him do His thing as long as it is beneficial to us. And the moment these things become not beneficial to us are the exact same moment that we stop trusting Him. The moment it denies us what we want, the moment we have to wait on something, the moment we have to go through something unpleasant, we tend to just put God on the side and then want to pursue our own thing and want to do our own thing. And so what we see here is we really see what someone has placed their faith in when they're going through hardship. Did they place their faith in God, or have they placed their faith in themselves and their own abilities, their bank account, their family, something else besides God? And when the chips are down, when hardship comes, that really shows us what that is. And so that's something we should bear in mind. What do you go to when you are going through hardship, when you're going through hard times? Do you buckle down in your job? Do you rely more on your family? Do you seek the Lord and patiently wait on Him? What do you do when hardship comes? That'll probably tell you what you're truly worshiping or where your trust truly lies. The book says this. It says, we see the strength that Jeremiah gained in waiting patiently on God. We find strength and help as well when we wait on Him and work things out in our lives. Wait on Him to work things out in our lives. No matter how dark things may seem, we can trust Him to do what is right for us. Let's look at our last passage. This is going to be verses 31 through 33. And I want you to look for the evidence of Jeremiah's confidence in God's love. Picking up in 31, it says this: For the Lord will not reject us forever. Even if he causes suffering, he will show compassion, according to the abundance of his faithful love. For he does not enjoy bringing affliction or suffering on mankind. So I want to point something out about this. He says here, for he will show compassion according to the abundance of his faithful love. And that faithful love term appears a lot in the scriptures, especially in the Old Testament. And it's a Hebrew word. If you ever hear it, it's hasad. And it means, it is such a rich theological word because it means abundant love, it means grace, it means merciful love, faithful love. It is this big word in the Old Testament that often describes how God relates to Israel. And it's this idea of being gracious and merciful, faithful, loving, and how just kind of wrapping all of those things up. And it is such a powerful thing when we look at this. We again see that Jeremiah is still suffering. He's saying that he's talking about God rejecting and him causing suffering, and yet at that same time, he is looking to God, knowing that God is faithful, that he loves them, that he is merciful and gracious, and that God is going to show up in every way imaginable. Jeremiah has 100% put his confidence in God, even in the midst of suffering, that God is going to do something with this time and then see him through into better times. The book asks this question. It says, how is discipline a function of love? Can one have love without discipline? Explain. Well, let's take a couple minutes to explain that. How is discipline a function of love, and can one have love without discipline? Take a couple minutes to discuss that, and then we'll wrap up our study. I think if we are looking from a Christian worldview, from a Bible-based worldview, I think we have to see this relationship between love and discipline. In fact, I really feel like if we are unwilling to discipline, unwilling to receive discipline, unwilling to discipline, say, our children or whatever, that really is a sign of a lack of love. If God did not love us, if God did not care about us at all, then he would leave us to ourselves, to our lusts and our desires, and leave us to just figure things out on our own, and that's where we would be. But God, because he loves us, because he has this unfailing, faithful love towards us, he disciplines us. He wants what's best for us, and wanting what best for us means kind of disciplining us to not pursue after the things that are not what's best for us. And I think this is true of God and our relationship with us. I certainly see this played out in, say, my relationship with kids. I love my kids, and because I love my kids, I discipline them. I don't want my kids to be these selfish, mean, self-centered people who just do what they want, even if it hurts other people. And I don't want to put that on teachers. I don't want to put that on other kids. So I love my kids, and since I love my kids, I discipline my kids, and they get in trouble, and they have boundaries and all of those things, so that the very best things that I have to offer them, and I believe the very best things that God has to offer us, that's what we end up pursuing. And so again, we see that God's discipline, even towards Israel at this time, is to move them into a place where they can receive and appreciate God's blessing and the best that God has for them. As we close out our time today, I want to challenge you to take some time and maybe talk about ways that God has kind of put you in the waiting room, how God has put you in a place of maybe discomfort, put you in a place of discipline, of hardship, and how you've had to trust in him. And I want you to kind of talk about that. How has you seen this play out in your life? And looking at your life, how have you seen God's discipline in your life that reminded you that he loves you and that he is doing something good in your life? Take a couple minutes, close out your time discussing that, close in prayer, and then I want to invite you to join us for worship right here at Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. We meet at 11 o'clock in person. You can also watch us online through Facebook Live. Thank you so much for joining me for this Bible study. Starting next week, we'll begin a new session in the book of Mark. So we want you to join us for that. Thank you again. God bless.